Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Spark podcast, with our aim being to raise awareness of sexual assault and harassment in Ghana. On this episode, we'll be interviewing Development Practitioner Afua Ansre, who works with the Ministry of Gender. She came to share her ideas, experiences, and opinions on the situation. So, without further ado, let's get into it. A little bit of a disclaimer: when we're having the meeting, it was recorded in an environment with a very noisy background, so if you hear any unnecessary noise in the interview, we deeply apologize for that in advance, but please try to enjoy the interview and the content that will be within it. Thank you.
Okay, so I have about 32 years work experience on gender and development, and I think sexual harassment or generally violence against women and children play a major role in when you do work around gender and development, and especially when it comes to sexual harassment, because it happens almost everywhere, at home, at the workplace, in the marketplace, everywhere sexual harassment can take place. And it's I think it's part of our culture. It's the way that men are rated as compared to women. It's based on the power relations. It's based on the fact that I think it's also permitted somehow in our society. So it's something that happens a lot and in various forms and in different places.
So, do you have any cases or stories you would like to share when it comes to this topic?
There are various stories. I remember, I think when we used to go around and talk to students, and most of the time the stories they would have would be around sexual harassment between people in their homes, sometimes even their sister's husbands, because they are staying with their sister and their husband is harassing them, sometimes even their stepfathers, sometimes their lecturers. There are various ways in which they use the power they have over the girls to take advantage of them. And even at the workplace, even at the highest levels, it still takes place. Among politicians, it takes place. They use it to get them to do all sorts of things so that they can achieve their aim, basically. You want money, and so you use it. You want to stay in my house, they use that tool against you. So it goes on and on. Even in war situations, it happens. So there are several stories about sexual harassment, sometimes rape, sometimes defilement for those under 16 years. So there are several stories. I think even some of the lecturers came in the papers. One particular popular lecturer was accused of sexual harassment on his students. Even doctors and patients, it happens. So there are several stories. And sometimes they come around, the other people come around and say, oh, especially when it happens outside in town, what was she wearing? They tend to blame the woman about it. And I think the narrative should change. They should ask, so a woman can't wear what she wants because it's hurting somebody's eyes?
So, with all the stories that you've been able to acquire throughout your years in this field, are there any suggestions you have to help someone prevent themselves from any cases like this?
Okay, how do they protect themselves? I think there are various ways of protecting themselves, and there are different circles around which. So, on the wider circle, the government has a role to play. In the inner circle, the communities have a role to play. Further in, the families have a role to play. And right in the center, the individual has a role to play. So with the individual, how does she carry herself? And how does she understand her power? So some people blame themselves when this happens. And I don't know, somehow I think before they choose their victim, they will assess and know how strong or weak you are. So as an individual, I think you have to be aware and be sure that you are and confident that you are not supposed to be raped. So immediately they start whatever they are starting, you should know what you say to them to let them know that they cannot play those games with you. The community level, they have a role to play. Community leaders, the family, your parents have a role to protect you. Even sometimes brothers and sisters have a role to protect you. So what happens at the family level? At the community level, what are community leaders doing? What bylaws and things does the community have to prevent these things? At the national level or the government level, what is the ministry responsible for this doing? And how is it monitoring and making sure that these sort of things are not happening in the homes or at the workplace or whatever?
Okay, thank you. Being deeply rooted in this, what are the actions you think a person who's been sexually assaulted in Ghana should take?
Okay, so this comes to, again, the issue you just raised about preventing. What sort of structures have society and government put in place to prevent somebody to help somebody who has been raped? In other parts of the world, like when you even go to school, they will organize, like within the first week as part of your orientation, to teach you how to prevent these from happening with your peers and with your lecturers and all of that. And in fact, they even teach you some of the strategies to use to get evidence when somebody is sexually harassing you or even trying to rape you. You know, what do you have? A key. What can you use a key for? Can you take something from his office? Whatever it is. You can use that in future as your evidence. But we don't do that here. And when you have been raped, what's the first thing to do? Okay, assuming when we raped, we're upset. Within the first week, what can you do? Who can you see for counseling? All of that. We need to put that in place. It should be something that is well documented and advertised, like you want to do. Something that should be easily available to everybody. So now somebody's raped, what does the person do? I think for most people, the first thing they do is to go to DOFSU. But most of the time, that's after a long while and after being convinced to go for most people. And then when you go to DOFSU is now going to tell you, oh, okay, then go to the hospital. And when you go to the hospital, now here's about 400 or 500 Ghana cedis to do the test. And if you don't have that money, then you are not going to get that service to show that you've been raped. And then you are stuck. I think at a point there was a plan to do a fund for victims of violence, but I don't think that plan came into being. So there's nothing to help doctors, and doctors will also have to, if it comes like they have to be going to court to give evidence and all of that, and who is bearing the cost. So it's a whole lot of things that prevents girls and women from reporting rape, because it's like the whole world is then against you. You have to prove that you've been raped. I mean, why should you be the one to prove that you've been raped? You understand? It's a bit too much for a lot of people. So.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, what do you think it's important? Like, what message do you want to give out concerning this? Like, what do you think is important for people to know?
I think this is a very important subject because it's something that does not just touch the soul of the body of the person. You are not just raping the person and the person is just being raped, but it touches the soul. It forever affects how the person thinks. Sometimes girls are not even interested in having affairs with other people because of the traumatic experience they've been through with these sort of things. And it also demoralizes the whole economy. Think about somebody saying, oh, you've got to sexually harassing you because you want a job, and every time you go, he has to do something to give you a job. You understand? How is the society going to end up? Not with people who are qualified, but with mediocre people who can't do anything. So it has a lot of ramifications, and it should be stopped. How it should be stopped depends on all of us. But there are only a few people who are taking any action. And like we have just discussed, there's even no clear-cut way of dealing with it when you are raped, because it has every aspect is touched. Physically, you have to go to hospital, there's no money. Emotionally, you have to stand all these court things and all of that. maybe you are not strong enough for that. It takes your time, it saps your energy, and so you give up. So people should be supported, but the support systems are not in place. But at every level, there should be some form of support system for the victim. And even before somebody gets to becoming a victim, we should prevent it. And I'm sure you know that there's nothing that's out there helping people to defend themselves or to avoid situations where they are harassed. And so it's still going on, and we are all still suffering. So I'll just motivate you and encourage you not to give up, to go out and do what you want to do. Even if you touch one person, you've done very well.
Okay, so I'm sure we all learned some valuable information from all of what she said, but to point out some things that she touched on, which are victim blaming, rape, defilement, and the list goes on. We can start with talking about rape and defilement. In Ghana, rape is the act of, having unconsensual intercourse with a person, and defilement is basically the same thing, but it's when a person who is above the age of 16 has had unconsensual sex with someone below the age of 16. So once that happened, the case isn't determined as rape, it's determined as defilement. Whereas if a person has unconsensual sex with someone who is above the age of 16, that can be classified as rape. She also talked about victim blaming, whereas whenever like a situation like rape or anything like that happens, they always start to, pinpoint the victim, like, oh, what were you wearing? Oh, we can only blame you because whenever cases like this happen, the first conclusion they always jump to was, oh, what was the victim wearing? Or maybe she brought it onto herself, or maybe she did this to herself. It's never the victim's fault, because the perpetrator should know what they're doing. They should know that what they're doing isn't right, and they shouldn't be inflicting or doing that kind of act in the first place. So, no, it's never the victim's fault, because everyone is entitled to wear whatever they want to wear. She also talked about people abusing their power, or politicians, pastors, people who are in high places, managers. Like if you want to get a job, the manager might say, oh, you have to sleep with me before I give you the job. Basically, people abuse the power that they have and then use it to bring about cases like this, bring about cases like rape or just stuff like that, because the victim doesn't want to have intercourse with you, because the victim wants the job. You're going to bring about that scenario. Even though the victim went through with that, it was only because they wanted the job. So you abusing your power to do that kind of act isn't really good. And if you listen to the news these days, you will hear that in workplaces in Ghana, the sexual harassment or sexual assaults in workplaces are getting out of hand. They're getting too much. It's gotten to the point where people are complaining and trying to set laws and policies about this type of situations in these workplaces. It's sad that things like this are still happening. And with the interview with Madame Afua, she also asked some really, really important questions, which institutions like schools and workplaces, communities, the governments should be asking themselves when it comes to this kind of situations. What policies have you put in place to prevent this? And in schools, because school is where it all starts. Are schools teaching their students all about this? Are students aware that, yes, sexual assaults and harassment, such as rape and catcalling, still happen, and they should learn why not to do it and how to protect themselves in situations like that? Are students aware of this kind of situations? If not, then it's their responsibility as a school to sit down and start to teach their students about this. They should start to implement this in their curriculum or their day-to-day basis. Even if this topic is spoken about once in the week, in the whole week, it should still be spoken about, because it's really, really, really important. And it's better for students to know about this at their student years, rather than to step into the real world and not be able to know what to do. If they have any resources with them, they should learn how to use a pen to defend themselves, or use a key to defend themselves, or what they would need when they are faced with this kind of situation in real life. Are students aware of the things that they should do after they encounter this kind of situations, and how does schools combat this kind of situations when they hear about it in a normal situation or a normal circumstance? I think every school should really start to think about this, think about helping their students, think about creating safe spaces for victims or perpetrators. Not exactly safe spaces for perpetrators, but they should help educate them on what they've done. Just because they've done it doesn't mean they still can't learn how to be better people. Yes, they will face the consequences of their actions, but it's still important for them to learn why they shouldn't do it, so that when they're done with their whole punishment or whatever, they don't commit that act again. Because it's very, very, very important that we make people aware of why they shouldn't do it, so that they don't commit those acts again. And as for victims, we should create safe spaces, counseling, because whenever a victim undergoes this kind of situations, it's either they keep this kind of they keep their stories within them, and then it brews it inside of them, it boils, and they just keep it in, and it just affects their whole life experience, and they feel they're below the world and they can't do anything about it, because they don't feel safe enough to talk to their parents or relatives or friends about it, because it's a very, very traumatic experience. So I think that schools should really start to work on this, and communities, the NPs of different areas or aspects of Ghana, the government, everyone should try to play a role in trying to help educate their citizens about these kinds of things, because it still happens, but people aren't aware of it, and it's kind of sad. I believe that if people are aware of what's going on around us, not just from my podcast, but just from reading the news, or just trying to learn more about it through journals, watching the news rather than just reading it on a newspaper. There's so many resources that provide information on this. But in the next episodes, we will be interviewing victims, and we will look at how these scenarios such as abusing power, or students abusing their role or status, or just relatives also taking advantage of their just their place in that family or whatever. There's so many scenarios that play part into bringing about certain sexual assault cases, and we just need to see how those things came about, so that we can listen to them and then try to figure out how to prevent those things from happening to us, and also need to learn how to take care of these victims when they undergo these traumatic experiences. Feel free to glance through my website and try to find some resources to contact just to get help if you've ever been a victim of sexual assault or harassment, or just to try to learn how to help a victim when they undergo these type of situations. There are a lot of emergency numbers you can contact. There are group forums, and you can go and share your stories on these group forums. You can be anonymous if you don't feel comfortable or safe enough to, voice out your story on my podcast. You're always free to just talk about it on the forums and just learn how to protect yourself or prevent these type of things from happening to you, because everyone's voice matters and everyone deserves to be protected from these kind of situations. And even if you are a perpetrator in this kind of situation, you're not hated. You still have an opportunity to learn how to better yourself and learn how to make the person you traumatized be better about themselves. Because even though you have hurt them physically, you've also damaged them emotionally, and I think it's your responsibility to try to bring closure. Of course the victim wouldn't want to talk to you. Honestly, it depends, but it's the effort that counts. As a whole, we're all supposed to put in effort to try to make the victim feel comfortable, to feel try to get back to where they were before they underwent this whole traumatic experience. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode, and don't forget to be the spark that lights the flame in others to want to learn about this and also try to make a difference when it comes to sexual assault and harassment. Have a great day.